Here's what you're about to see. The world's first real demonstration of a learning swarm. Hundreds of drones splitting into multiple forces, each facing a different battlefield challenge. Radar, jamming, manned fighters, and adapting instantly. Then converging in coordinated waves on Russia's premier weapons plant. By the end, you'll understand why air defense math simply doesn't work anymore, and why this one operation flipped the cost equation of war upside down. But before the destruction, we have to start with the launch. When 340 machines rose into the night sky, and Russia realized something unprecedented was coming. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why did Russia's most advanced air defense missiles waste themselves against empty sky? That puzzle began just after midnight, when part of the Ukrainian swarm skimmed low across the rough, uneven terrain leading toward Kursk. Each drone carried the Skynote S autopilot system, a compact onboard AI that constantly recalculated its position by reading the ground below and reacting to ridgelines, valleys, and tree lines in real time. Flying no more than 100 meters above the surface, they stayed below the clean radar horizon, only breaking into view when sudden rises in elevation forced them higher. Russian S-400 operators scanning the northern arc began noticing odd reflections on their radar scopes. Instead of crisp profiles showing aircraft or missiles, the returns appeared vague, spread out, and strangely intermittent. Some blips would vanish, replaced by ghost echoes flickering near treetop level. The defense crews tried to classify these objects but found no clear match. Conventional fighter jets have large radar signatures, and cruise missiles leave fast, consistent trails. These shapes acted nothing like that. They looked more like fragments than solid aircraft, confusing systems designed to weigh size and velocity to produce an identification. Part of the trick came from the drone's reflective surfaces. Their frames were small, with narrow angles that scattered radar energy instead of bouncing it directly back. Combined with constant low-altitude maneuvering, the swarm generated false signals resembling clutter from rivers, rocks, and foliage. In other words, the radar began seeing phantoms, illusions created when terrain features and scattered returns overlapped. The crews had to guess which signals were real targets and which were just noise bleeding across the screen. The problem stretched deeper than operator error. The S-400 itself was built to fight a completely different battle. It was optimized to destroy bombers, ballistic missiles, even stealth fighters at ranges of hundreds of kilometers. Its radars were never meant to discriminate dozens of insect-sized objects moving erratically in ground clutter. So when a collection of echoes flashed too persistently to ignore, commanders gave the order to fire. 2 interceptors lifted, each carrying warheads worth millions of dollars, streaking into the night sky guided by radar tracks that offered no real targets. Seconds later, both missiles detonated harmlessly, punching nothing but empty air. The wasted intercept was not the only loss counted that hour. 12 of the drones never made it past the forest edge. Terrain-aware navigation at such low altitudes left razor-thin margins for error. A single misread slope, sudden gust, or delay in command execution could slam a machine into the ground. The Skynote S was advanced but not invincible. Attrition came naturally from how the mission was executed, stripping numbers from the swarm before the defenders even opened fire. This underlined both the brilliance and fragility of the tactic. Machines were hard to catch, but not immune to the landscape itself. For Russia, the trade-off looked severe. 2 missile interceptors valued in the millions were spent to engage signals that were never there, while drones that cost a fraction of that kept streaming forward. Even with mechanical losses, the bulk of the northern formation broke through intact. The imbalance between weapon expense and target resilience was impossible to ignore. As one side burned money and failed interceptions, the other side paid only in expendable machines. The night sky over Kursk told a blunt story. High-prestige systems like the S-400, symbols of Russian precision defense, could be bled dry fighting against low-cost, autonomous swarms. And with radars fooled and interceptors wasted, Russia turned to its next shield, jamming the entire southern approach under a blanket of electronic warfare. Could the drones handle a blackout of their GPS? Imagine flying blind through 200 kilometers of darkness, no signals left to guide you. That is the situation the Ukrainian drones faced as Russian electronic warfare units switched on their broadcast. The southern approach to their target was suddenly blanketed with jamming waves, disrupting every GPS band across the air corridor. Normally, when that signal vanishes, a drone can do little except drift slowly off course. Even tiny deviations eventually add up to dozens of kilometers. In wartime, that means wreckage in the woods or a crash long before reaching the intended target. Russia had every reason to think it had just crippled the second strike group, sealing off the most obvious flight path. Instead, what followed looked more like adaptation than failure. The swarm's onboard systems immediately flagged the signal collapse. Rather than continue down a trackless void, the guidance mode shifted without pause. Cameras mounted under each airframe began comparing terrain features beneath them with images stored in their banks of memory. Highways, rivers, even the faint curves of rail junctions became digital road signs for the machines, each one checking and rechecking its position against what it already knew. Like a driver who loses satellite directions but still remembers landmarks, the swarm treated the ground below as a reference grid. Within minutes, 85 drones had aligned over the Moscow-Rostov highway, the M4 corridor that runs like a long gray scar from one end of the region to the other. To anyone watching from below, the sight must have been uncanny. Lines of glowing orbs swept over the asphalt, not weaving, not fumbling, but tracing the highway as though tied to it by invisible strings. Endless kilometers of trucks and cars rolled unaware beneath them, as the formation clung to the bends and curves of the road with mechanical consistency. This was an army of machines falsifying its own GPS by building one out of asphalt. But reliance on breadcrumb navigation carried real dangers. A single misinterpretation of a curve could fling part of the group into densely forested areas or toward a river. Unlike GPS, the visual system had margins much thinner, far less forgiving of error. Every mistake was magnified by the speed at which the drones traveled, hundreds of kilometers an hour. One wrong shape in the landscape could end the flight path for whole sections of the line. It was as though pilots were relying only on faint shadows in the dark to steer. Even without enemy fire, machines were still being claimed. The launch had been rushed, churning out large numbers in a compressed window to make coordination possible. That stress wore down airframes. By the time the group hit the second leg, 8 drones had collapsed from mechanical issues, engines sputtering or wings failing under pressure. Their wreckage added to the attrition that night, a reminder that not every loss was caused by Russian defenses. Fatigue itself became a hidden enemy inside the mission. Still, despite losses, the procession kept tightening around the asphalt line, unbroken in its rhythm. The swarm continued forward, bypassing the jamming net that was supposed to scatter it over empty fields. What human pilots might approximate by watching ground lights through a cockpit window had been replicated in machine logic, executed at a tempo no person could endure for long. In that moment, electronic warfare no longer guaranteed a shield. The swarm simply sidestepped the blackout using cameras and memory, beating back the one defense that had seemed inevitable. With radars tricked and jamming defeated, Russia turned to its last option, sending fighter pilots into the hunt. But chasing machines built to skim the farmland at low altitude would come with its own price. What unfolded was the first glimpse of a learning swarm in battle. Machines didn't just follow pre-programmed paths, they adapted in real time, shared data, and corrected for losses on the fly. Defenses built for traditional aircraft couldn't keep pace with machines that worked like a collective brain, updating routes the moment interference appeared. If billions invested in layered missile shields can be unraveled by $68 million worth of expendable drones, every military has to question the balance between cost and survival. And when the next swarm rises, the real question becomes, will today's defenses mean anything at all?